If you've sold your soul based on party lines, then you're going to think what I'm about to say is political. If you've sold your soul to the belief in a single will state, then you're going to think what I'm about to say is heretical. But if you believe in a free society, the rights afforded to individual liberty, then I have an unpopular message for you. Sometimes the solution to a problem is the problem. I'm posting this video on Friday, January 15th, 2021, Martin Luther King's birthday. It's been nearly 60 years since Martin Luther King shared his dream with the world. He knew,
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
And yet today, the chains of discrimination are still holding people down. I can vividly remember the day that I first learned about Martin Luther King Jr. It was 30 years ago. I was 6 years old, sitting in first grade. When the teacher explained to us the message, what was going on at the time, what had happened in the past with slavery, I remember the room just felt so small, like it was closing in on me. And I was hit with this realization that somehow my best friend Mark was different than me. And worse, some people still believed that he was different than me. Mark was black, and being a redhead, it was our difference that we found commonality in. I knew then, and have always believed it to be self-evident, that Black Lives Matter. Now, last year, in 2020, I also thought it to be self-evident that the Black Lives Matter movement and BLM, the organization, are two separate things. Yet, in all their self-righteous glory, the Christian right came out and could not sort out the devil in the details. All fingers are pointed at BLM's Marxist leadership. I'm not here to pass judgment on the how, the what, or the who, but I haven't seen anyone talking about why. First of all, why is that a surprise? Marx's ideas came from the belief that he was oppressed by capitalism. As King points out, democracy hasn't helped the cause either.
In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds.
Now, who is responsible for these insufficient funds? In America, the bank, so to speak, is capitalistic. So why not turn to a new experiment? It makes sense, doesn't it? But that is the key problem here, is we tend to forget that this whole thing, every system, whether it's democracy, socialism, capitalism, you name it, is really just an experiment. But why? Why is Marx treated like a devil in Christian America? Well, again, we need to turn to Dr. King himself. The best summary of Dr. King's beliefs that I've seen is Simon Sinek.
Dr. King believed that there are two types of laws in this world, those that are made by a higher authority and those that are made by man. And not until all the laws that are made by man are consistent with the laws that are made by the higher authority will we live in a just world.
One of those main tenets is free will. The problem that I have with Marxist ideas is the single will state. When Jefferson wrote that all men are created equal, there was one man who had not yet been created. His name always ends in INC. Corporations may compete in a capitalistic economy, but internally, they're a single will experiment. Don't believe me? Look at healthcare. When your company provides you with healthcare, that's called a benefit. If the government does it, we call it socialism. Deductive reasoning would tell you that companies are socialist institutions. In 2016, I owned my own business, and I was a Bernie supporter. The one thing I didn't really like about him is the fact that he called himself a socialist. Now, he did say he was a democratic socialist, but I've been thinking back to my economy classes and political science, and I can't remember learning about democratic socialism. So I thought it was a little crazy that Bernie called himself a socialist. The reason being was I didn't find any of his policies to actually be socialist. Now, as a business owner, I really liked his policy because I could afford employees. I wouldn't have to compete with the larger businesses that could give employees better benefits than I could. Pre-Bernie, assuming that I'd never heard of democratic socialism, if you had come up to me and said, Jeff, I got this idea. I'm gonna create a new economic political system called democratic socialism. Can you help me design it? I would have laughed at you and said, you mean capitalism? You see, capitalism is democratic. By nature, the economy is already democratic. You vote with money. You vote with your investment. There's nothing socialist about a democratic government stepping in when the will of the people is hampered by the single will state of affairs. Our wealth as Americans comes in the form of access to labor. But the secret to freedom in America is ownership. Instead of promoting competition as consumer protection, we also need to realize its place as employee protection. With the realization that your employee is just a customer until you incentivize them to own the will of the company. Most Americans don't own anything other than their free will. And for many, their will has been oppressed for way too long. What makes you think socialism would be any different? If you don't trust your government, and you don't trust corporations, how the hell do you think socialism will work? How will you find jobs? Who will decide what's produced, when it's produced, or how it's produced? A lot of the freedoms you enjoy today, do you really want to put them in the hands of your government? Now I realize this video is interlaced with a bunch of my beliefs that need to be further unpacked for you to really get on board with the ideas. But if you like this concept that I've outlined here, then go ahead and subscribe to YouTube or follow me on LinkedIn and put in the comments below what kind of ideas you disagree with or you'd like me to unpack further, and I'll make subsequent videos. Either way, these videos are coming, so you hold tight, hit subscribe.
But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children.
To those of you promoting socialism, my fellow millennials, stop pointing at capitalist economies and calling them socialist. You're looking at the Nordic model, you big dummies. Note to self, begin promoting social capitalism.